So this is a topic that in my AI LLM prompt tracking research, I kind of realized no, this is a good, two things kind of validated this topic for me. The first was doing some of that research, but then also trolling through some of the subreddits about SaaS and also B2B SaaS, et cetera, and how much discussion there is about product validation and idea validation and early product market fit. And there's a lot of pervasive ideas around this that still frustrate me. And then others that are like super smart, yes, do this. And I kind of wanted to talk through the masterclass, so to speak, of how to validate your product ideas if you have budget and also if you don't have budget. So that's the topic for today.
I like this. Now, to set the scene, is this the core product is working, selling, and now these are additional add-ons, or like what is this looking like?
Yeah, what's the scope, the stage? I'm thinking pre-MVP, pre-product. So before early. Now, it's interesting. Most of our clients have a product that they're selling. They have customers and they have relatively stable churn monthly. I say relatively because we have worked with clients that don't have stable churn, and that's why they hire us, because they want to fix churn. That's going to be a future episode, by the way. But there are some companies that we work with and have worked with that were pre-product. It's so funny because people ask, what's the right stage to hire DemandMaven? And I'm like, it's not about the stage, it's about the problem. And this is a sticky problem. And if you have the budget to solve it, and if this is a large enough problem for you, and also a large enough opportunity for you, it's worth the risk, then hiring a firm like ours to help conduct the research makes sense. Sometimes it's not like a bootstrap founder with a full-time job already. Sometimes it's more like there are corporations out there that want to invest in SaaS. They want to build a SaaS for some reason, but they've never done any type of market research or product market fit analysis or idea validation, and they hire a firm like ours to do it because they have the money to spend, they have the resources, and it's worth for them to figure it out and understand it. So anyway, I digress. So this has come up a few. We've done projects like this before, where someone, sometimes it's a founder who's about to go and get a bunch of VC money. I'm thinking of the bank that we worked on. So the digital bank that we worked on.
Yep.
I actually don't know if they ever went to market, and if they did, they rebranded. But they were about to go and raise a lot of money. And what they needed to do was validate their ideas and show that they had done the work, so to speak, putting that in finger quotes, for all the VCs and all of the investors that they were going to go and talk to and try to, secure funds from. And the process it can be very rigorous. And there are things that I think are just kind of a waste of time. But I know that there are going to be people who will fight me on this. And I welcome that debate.
Okay.
So when it comes to idea validation, and again, your mileage may vary based on the resources and time, energy, money, and also people, based on the resources that you have and or have access to. But what I find is there are a few paths that are most effective, and a few that I just don't think it works today. I'm going to start with the most outdated method that I know of. And so let's say you have a product idea and you're like, I want to build this, or maybe you've already built it. That's possible too. Sometimes, it's particularly technical bootstrap founders, sometimes they get really inspired by something, usually because it's a problem that they're experiencing, or that they know someone directly is experiencing, and they want to just build it. And so then they do. And then what ends up happening is they build the product first, and then they're like, okay, now who is my market? Where is my market? And I find this is a pretty risky way to go, in my opinion, because you don't know how big the market is, or how big the opportunity is, or even who you're actually building for until you do the research. And it's really hard, I find, to build something first and then be like, who wants this, than it is to say, who do I want to build for, and then build something. So it's kind of like putting the cart before the horse a little bit. But there are businesses out there who have made it, who have become successful, or whatever you want to call it, however you define success, by building something first and then being like, okay, now who wants it? There are certainly cases where businesses and founders have been successful in that scenario. But I find if you want to reduce the risk of that flopping, then ideally you would start with, okay, who do I want to solve this problem for, and what problem do I want to solve? And actually, you might even reverse that. You might say, what problem do I want to solve and for who? And then you decide, okay, here's what I build, yada, yada, yada. In both of those scenarios, the outdated method that I mentioned earlier that I kind of buried the lead on a little bit is it has to do with like, okay, you have this idea, you either build it or you don't, whatever, but you have the idea. And if you want to test this idea, it's really common to recommend running ad campaigns, building landing pages, and running ads to test the idea. And the test is, if I can build an ad campaign, run a bunch of traffic to it, and get leads, then that is proof that my idea is a good one. And I am here to say that it actually doesn't prove anything except for your ability to execute that channel.
Question: does this apply to B2B and B2C, or are you thinking in just a B2B context?
In SaaS, this is largely, I would say this is more true for B2B than B2C. I think for B2C SaaS, which is a different ballgame, I do think you can relatively quickly test certain ideas if you're doing B2C. But when it comes to, but there are still, it's still like a your mileage may vary scenario. I find more often than not, all using ads does for you is just tests your ability to like execute that channel well. How people will sit with your product long term to know if it's going to be a good enough idea or not, just based off of the channel alone.
Right.
But there are lots of issues. Because
what you're saying is like you basically can attract anyone to any product if you're good at executing in that channel, like paid wise.
Yeah, you can get traffic to any landing page. It's actually really easy. It's extremely easy. A lot of it will be bots, but it's actually really easy to get traffic on a page. What's much harder is getting people to convert, getting people to, and that's off the landing page or whatever the funnel is. Then when they're actually in the product, getting them to pay for it. And then even after they pay for it, they still have to stay. There's a blog post I wrote a million years ago, and it talks about the 8 customer yeses. Customers have to say yes 7 to 8 times just to be a long-time paying customer. And ads they don't even get past the second or third yes. Like they can't actually validate your idea. And April Dunford actually talks about this. I talked about April earlier. She actually talks about how the risk with ads is you are making the assumption that you're going to execute this flawlessly in order for you to know if this is an idea that is worthy of pursuing. And what she means by that is you have to have the right copy. You have to have the right, if it's visual, you have to have the right creative asset, whether that's a graphic or a video. Then you have to have the right call to action. You have to have the right segmentation and targeting. You have to have the right funnel or landing experience. And that has to have the right messaging and copy. And then you have to and it continues to stack and stack and stack. So you have all of these variables kind of bundled into one small experience, which is seeing an ad, clicking it, and then entering the funnel, and then hopefully, possibly, potentially becoming either a user or a customer, or even just like a wait list. And I think this is a really popular approach because you can waitlist things for sure. Like you can create landing pages that are like, oh yeah, like let's get the waitlist going. And and then when we launch, we'll launch it to the list. But what I find is it's such a low conversion rate. And also too, if you're not super clear on who you're building for, you end up wasting a lot of energy on people who just aren't ever really going to be good fits. And you won't know that though. And you wouldn't know that, obviously, unless you did it. But it's one of those scenarios where it's like, if you build a product and then you're trying to find a market for it, this is why this is so messy, because it could take you years to find the right person just by going through this process. And also too, it kind of makes the other assumption, if you're doing this like launch building thing, or like if you're doing this like list building thing, it makes the assumption that you're going to be excellent at user story mapping, interviewing these potential customers. Like you're gonna have to do customer discovery extremely well for you to know, okay, out of this list of randos that we generated based off of some early hypotheses, great, but now who's actually going to be a good user? And what we tend to see is like people who go this route, they'll end up building like lists of like hundreds, maybe sometimes even thousands of people. And then what usually ends up happening is they spend all this energy and effort. They end up with like 5 people that actually like use the product that in a meaningful way. And sometimes, very rarely, I've seen this, sometimes they actually do become paying. Most of the time they don't. Or if they do, They pay for like a month or two because they're just trying to be nice, and then they churn.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that energy and all that effort, and it's like, even if you were to get people through any experience or any funnel experience, at the end of the day, you may never actually have like any real paying customers, and you may not even have people who stay. And that to me is like such a, it's like, yes, let's get 10,000 people through my funnel, but maybe only one actually matters. And it's like finding a needle in a haystack.
Right. Yeah. It's just that the playbook, it just doesn't work, that playbook for SaaS at all.
There was a time when it did. And I want to give credit where credit is due. I think it did work for a while, but it is so expensive now and so competitive now that it really is like finding a needle in a haystack. And the other issue with it too, that I personally have, that I've seen a lot of teams fail with, is Google and Meta really can't optimize anything until it has a certain amount of volume, until you spend a certain amount of money, and until you know, you the user, the customer, until you know who your target audience is. And like, until you can give Google a list of like, find more people like this. And this happens automatically now through, various, API connections and things like that, like where you can literally pipe in like your customer base into the platforms and have it go find like your ideal customer. Like that's like the norm now. Until you have that though, Google and Meta can't operate efficiently or effectively for you anyway. So I think, and again, your mileage may vary. There are certainly teams that have figured out how to make this work, and there are certainly founders who have had success. But I would say though that they're outliers. They're actually not the norm. Most founders won't have success this way. It's very frustrating. But it's the most popular, I think, methodology, and it's the most popular recommended approach. Like if you were to go through Reddit or anything, a lot of what they'll recommend is like, get like $1,000 to $5,000, run some ads on Meta or Google, and then you'll have a sense for if your product is good or not. But my issue with that is, again, it's all those variables, it's all of the unknowns, and then it's also, you're really playing with the algorithms themselves. And you, like, in order for it to be efficient and effective, you kind of have to have examples of paying customers anyway. But if that's the case, you might as well do the work of go to market in the first place. Like, that's my argument. Like, if you're going to go and spend some money on ads to try to build a list or whatever, well, one, that conversion rate is going to be incredibly small. There are certainly founders who have had a lot of success. Like, we're talking to one right now that used the Facebook Google playbook or whatever. They had like tens of thousands of users like in their launch list. And then they actually did it like walk away with like 100 or 200 of their very first customers. But they have the issue of churn. They have like, it's like, I don't know, 40 to 50% churn like every month. Like they have to continue to pay more, do more to fill their leaky bucket basically. And so they're kind of panicking. I don't want to say panicking, but they're trying to figure out like, how do we mitigate churn? And it's like, okay, well, when you built the product, who were you really building it for? Because my guess is whoever it is that you're trying to target on these ad channels, like it's not computing into anything that is real. And I remember they gave me like a very general, we're targeting founders on the globe. And I was like, any and every founder? Because that's a huge market that you're going to have hard, like, especially bootstrapped, like you're going to have a hard time. So then I was like, okay, well, like, let's get more specific. And they're like, okay. Founders in tech. And I was like, not specific enough. We need to get way more specific than this. Yeah, super not helping. So really, like, if you're going to go that route, you might as well just do the work of go to market. So there are a couple of other ways that we can validate our product ideas. I'm going to go through ones that I think are far more effective. Now, the fundamental question is going to be, well, how do you get in front of the right people? And that is always going to be the tough question. What most founders start with, they start with their friends, they start with family, and they start with relatively immediate network. If you think about like the degrees of people that you know or whatever, a lot of people, if it makes sense to start with like their first degree connections, so like their families, their like super close friends. If you're building something that appeals to those people, great. Usually though, I find like most founders kind of go to that second degree or second level, and that ends up being like colleagues, your personal network, people that you may have exposure to in some kind of way. And ideally, you are directly talking to those people before you ever build anything. Some people, they'll get excited and they want to build it immediately. And that's fair. Like if you go through like our SaaS, like the subreddit SaaS, or there are a couple of other subreddits. Like there are several technical founders who are like they're building something relatively niche, and it's, they're like, I'm just going to throw this on GitHub and just see what happens. And like sometimes like that's enough. That works. But if you're building something that requires it's an audience maybe outside of yourself, like you're not targeting like other yous basically, or you're building something that's a bit more, I don't want to say substantial, but you're building something a bit more complex, we'll say. And maybe it is more like B2B. It could certainly be B2C still. You're going to need you're going to need a better process. And ideally you are talking to, if it's not your direct prospect, like if it's not someone that you're like, oh, you'd be the perfect buyer, ideally it's like a proxy for that perfect buyer. So proxy in research world means this is someone who isn't like the exact person we target, but they either know that prospect type. So like, let's say you're targeting CMOs, a proxy would be like the CMO's executive assistant, or a proxy might be like a VP of marketing, maybe in a smaller organization. That's the type of like proxy that we're thinking about. If you're targeting founders, well, one, we got to get more specific about like, well, what type of founder, but you might find like maybe your ideal buyer is someone who is like a SaaS CEO, maybe a first-time SaaS CEO in the United States of tech companies that have gotten like a Series A, and maybe you're focused on like fintech or health tech or something. Like that's a lot more specific than founders. Maybe that's your ideal buyer, but maybe you can't get to that person yet because maybe you don't know anybody who knows that guy. So maybe instead you talk to maybe other founders, CEOs that you know, or could like maybe get more connected to, but maybe they're not in fintech, but maybe they're in like some other like tech world. Maybe they're actually not tech founders or CEOs. Maybe they're like CEOs of agencies that sell to those guys. Like that could be like a proxy. So like, who do you know, or who can you, how close can you get to that person who knows either that buyer or potentially could be the buyer that you're thinking of? That's the ideal scenario. And a lot of that happens through talking to people, asking for connections, asking for, hey, I'm building this. I would love to talk to these people. Is there anyone that you put me in front of? And there are more people in the world who'd want to help you than not. This can be really intimidating for the technical bootstrap founder who hasn't talked to anyone in 10 years. Like, you know what I mean? Like you've been, I don't want to say like under a rock, but like you've not been like building your network. That can be really intimidating for a lot of people. Right. I think in those scenarios, I think a couple of things have to happen. I think you either start building that network, you either start building up that muscle, or you can think about building and launching maybe in a more covert or quiet way and slowly building up your like user base. But ideally, you still end up talking to someone to validate these ideas. I do think, though, it depends a little bit on the risk. Like if it's a relatively low risk product for you to build and just like throw up on GitHub and like call it a day, do that. But if it's a higher risk thing, like if it's going to be something that's going to require you to become full-time or require you to put up $200K to build or whatever it is, you're going to want to do the work to try to get in front of someone before you actually commit to building the thing.
Right. Yeah. It's like networking.
I know. Yeah.
Start having conversations and seeing who can connect you. And thinking in proxies is good advice. Like sometimes if you're drilling in, and the same goes for networking, like I need to talk to this person specifically. It's like, well, like how can other people refer you to that type of person, and what does that proxy look like?
Totally. And sometimes it's also like, what communities can you participate in? Sometimes like just like reaching out to people and talking to them is intimidating. And then there are some founders who they build very quietly. They very quietly build like a little bit of a following, like, and maybe they don't do any immediate like upfront networking, but maybe they commit to the MVP. They launch it in whatever way, and their whole process really becomes more of like a creative feedback process where they start building in public, and that kind of attracts their buyer to them, or that attracts people who know people. Super connectors is what we call them. So there are many different ways to go about this that don't require ads. And building in public is actually one of my favorite ways, even before you even build anything, even like talking about the problem that you want to solve and publishing that in places that you feel like your ideal buyer is, or like the person, like, you know, people maybe who can lift you up, or people who can help distribute like your message can help. And I like this way more than spending a bunch of money on ads. Now, I will say it's slower. So that's the trade-off, right? So it's going to be slower. But to be fair, kicking off a bunch of ad campaigns isn't necessarily going to guarantee success either, which is why I always say, like, yeah, I mean, ads can be a great way to spend a lot of money fast and set it on fire. But it could also, again, your mileage may vary, but you still have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of like, you might come out on the other end of this having no answers, having no customers.
Right.
But anyway, so those are a couple of ways to think about whether you build first and then go to market later, or whether you define the go to market process first and then and again, it's going to be very early go to market because you don't actually know. You're not ever going to know until you start charging for the thing, to be honest, if you have decent product market fit. But you can at least get a feeling for if this is going to be a viable opportunity for you or not. But there are a couple of steps I'm going to add to this after, but I'll pause here.
No, this all sounds good. When you said that people on Reddit are on the r SaaS are saying, yeah, throw up ads, I'm just surprised by that because it feels outdated to me.
So there's a lot of incomplete information. There's also a lot of like just super pervasive myths, and this is one of them. Where
interesting.
if you want to test or validate your product idea, run ad campaigns, and I'm like, actually, don't waste your time. Don't waste your time. Yeah. If you have money to burn and you want to go fast, but you also have the resources, the skills, the experience, even the team to help you make the most of that, then it could work. But if you don't, if you're someone who's like, actually, no, I kind of suck at interviewing people, or like, actually, no, I'm not the best at, like building super effective marketing funnels, like you're probably going to have a hard time. You're going to have a bad time.
Right.
And you're going to be, money, like cash poorer for it. And that's going to be frustrating. What's a requirement to me in this product idea validation process? There are really two things. The first is you really should be talking to actual humans. The way that you should be talking to them, though, because it's not enough to just be like, okay, I've talked to a person. There's a book that I highly recommend called The Mom Test by Rob Fitzpatrick. It is still one of my favorite resources for early stage founders, entrepreneurs, people who want to build, but they don't know quite yet how or what they want to do or who even they want to work with or serve at the end of the day. Because if you're building a product, the assumption is that you want to build something that helps people. Who do you want to help and what do you want to help them with? Like those are the two most fundamental questions that you can ask at this stage. And what I love about the mom test is it gives you real conversations, or at least reading through what they will sound like. And what I love about it is it gives you here's what a bad interview sounds like. Like, oh, I noticed you do this. Do you want this? What if I built that for you? And it's like, okay. And then of course, you do it and then they're like, but I don't need this actually. And I don't want to pay for it. It's like a waste of time. That's what a bad interview sounds like. But then on the flip side, the mom test also does a really good job of outlining, here's what a good user story sounds like. And it sounds like not directly asking someone, hey, I'm thinking of building this. Do you think it will be valuable? But actually going through the process of, well, what are they trying to accomplish? And talking about how they try to accomplish it. And asking them, are there any issues or challenges that you have with this? And if you observe something that you perceive to be a challenge, that you test that assumption, that you actually validate that assumption or invalidate it, either one. But ultimately, there's a better way to talk to people about your ideas that doesn't just be like, I made this, do you want it? Or I'm going to build this, do you think that will help you? It's like, that's such a leading question. And most people are nice and are going to lie and be like, yeah, I would love that. I would love it if you built that for me. Please do. And then you do. And then you're like, damn, I was kind of hoping that they wouldn't remember that I said that. And then you have to do the awkward shimmy of, I'm sorry, this isn't what I'm sorry, bye. So you want to avoid that scenario. And I think the mom test is still to this day one of my favorite primers on how to think about doing customer discovery and also what really are user stories, but Rob describes it in a way that I think is really effective and also useful. And I still to this day, I'm like, this is still one of my favorite resources actually for early stage founders, and particularly ones who are in that MVP stage.
Yeah. And you can read it in a sitting.
Literally, I think it's an hour. It's you can read that book in an hour. It's super short. It's also hot pink.
Right. I'm trying to remember because I've read it. Is it, does the mom test refer to he was like, oh, I built this thing. Mom, will you use it? And she's like, yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't count. Was that the impetus for the title?
It's kind of you have to kind of treat customers as if they're like your mom or prospects, I should say, because they maybe aren't customers yet. But he gives the story of talking to his mom, though, as a good example, because mom is going to lie all day long to you because they're your mom. They love you. And they're like, yeah, I think that's a great idea, sweetie. I think you should build that. Because that's what moms do. They're usually, not all the time technically, but usually they're your number one fan. And so at least I know my mom is. the mom test is, how do you get your mom to give you brutally honest feedback without the brutality of it? So like, you get the feedback that you need. And also what I like about the book is Rob does a really good job of teaching you how to listen for opportunity versus this isn't really an opportunity. Like, it's all about training your ear for there's something here versus like, oh, that's going to be a waste of my time if I were to do that. That's what I also love about the book. And it's like I said, it's like Kim said, it's super short. You can read it in an hour, but you learn so much. And that to me is still to this day one of my favorite primers. I think it's a requirement. So if you haven't jumped straight to building, then you have the opportunity to build user stories, ideally with people, again, who could be your buyer or at least are close enough to your buyer. But even if they weren't close enough to, because I've actually done this before too. Again, they could be proxies, but it also could be people who are just experts in the industry. It doesn't even have to be people close to your buyer. I actually did this recently where I was curious about, there's a huge company called McKinney's. I think they're based in Atlanta. It's like a huge manufacturing company. They do like a ton of, right now they're building like a bunch of data centers, if I'm not mistaken, but they also build like a lot of, what are they called? Like stadiums. Like they're like one of the number one builders or creators of stadiums, I think in the US or something. I actually can't remember. And I remember I was talking to someone about like, does McKinney's do they have software? Like, is that like a thing that they're invested in? Or because I just was, largely I was curious, but also because I was like, I wonder if manufacturing, there's certainly software in the manufacturing space, but I just wonder like what that world looks like. And this was more out of pure curiosity than anything. But I ended up talking to someone who was like a manufacturing like expert, but on that side of the fence, because there's lots of many different, sub manufacturing verticals and all that. But it was pretty cool. And I kind of was like, this is like a really cool way to learn about the industry without, necessarily, like, I don't have to talk to the CEO of McKinney's to know like, here's what the space looks like. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I was to say, even if you can't get to like your exact buyer, you might be able to find someone who's an expert either about the company or about the industry that you're trying to enter into. Like, there's all kinds of things there. And then of course, a lot of founders rely on their own experience. So I've talked about Roaster Tools, I think, before. Roaster Tools, the founder, John, he used to be a coffee roaster, if I'm not mistaken. He was a coffee roaster, but he was also technical. And if I recall correctly, he shut down his coffee roasting business, but in return, he started up his software, like his coffee roasting software for roasters. And I love that story so much, but just because of how it's a story I think a lot of people can relate to, of like, oh, yep, I experienced that problem. I built a solution for me, really. But I felt like there were enough other me's to build a business and for it to be, I provide value and my customers feel like it's worth paying for, which is the ideal scenario. So talking to people, I think, is a requirement. The other thing I'm going to say is a requirement is at some point you are going to have to prove their level of engagement in some kind of way. The ideal way is to build and charge. Like, that's the most ideal, like charging real money. Like, that's how you really know if what you've built is worth it. But there are other ways to kind of validate if what you're gonna build or what you have built is worth it, maybe before you start charging. And there are a couple of things that I've seen people do that I think works a little bit better. So the first is sometimes you can actually offer it as a service first. So if you have an idea, it's a product idea. So SaaS is software as a service, where the software is doing the service. But before software, you can manually do the service. And you might have a product idea that can be executed manually before you ever build a huge giant platform. And what you can do is, a lot of times you can validate ideas by manually executing the thing first. And if you're technical, you're probably going to build some type of like little micro SaaS or micro software anyway to do this, because no technical founder I know ever wants to do anything manually. But if you're non-technical, exactly, they don't have to, especially not with like Cloud Cowork and all these other things, or Cloud Code and all that. But what I find interesting, though, is if you're non-technical, you can actually deliver your idea manually and validate it that way. My favorite story about this is actually Rachel McCrickard from Motivo. So Motivo is a clinical supervision platform/marketplace that connects up-and-coming therapists with clinical supervisors to help them get their supervision hours so they can actually become a therapist. In most states in the United States, you can't just like get your therapy degree and be like, okay, I'm going to go do a service now. I'm going to go and like deliver care to patients. Usually you have to get like anywhere from like could be as low as 50, but it could be as high as 200 hours from a clinical supervisor, basically a grown therapist who's made it already, like kind of watch you do your work for a certain number of hours until you're like ready to be out on your own. And some states, every state has different rules. I don't think any state has no clinical supervision, but I think every state does, if I'm not mistaken, but every state is different. Again, some of it's like high, some of it's low. So Motivo connects clinical supervisors with therapists who want to get supervision hours, which they have to pay for out of pocket, by the way. Like, this is not like, it's like they call it like the third degree after you get your main degree, or like the second degree that you have to pay for, because it is expensive. But this is also part of why we don't have as many therapists in the world. Just as a heads up. It's kind of fascinating how it works. It's one of like the number one reasons why people don't actually become a therapist, because they graduate and then they're like, I have to do clinical supervision too.
And then they have to pay for those to do those hours. They have to pay the person supervising them.
Yeah, and it's expensive. It can be anywhere from like 100 to 275 an hour. And if you have to do 200 of those hours, it could easily like block you from ever doing it. But anyway, so Motivo is the marketplace that connects people. And what I love about Rachel's story is that before she ever built the product, before she ever built the marketplace, before she ever went and got funding, she actually did it manually. She threw up a website. She had some forms, one for clinical supervisors and one for therapists. And she just focused on, I think it was Georgia, if I'm not mistaken, just focused on the state of Georgia, and manually was like, hey, if you're a therapist and you want a clinical supervisor, I have a database of supervisors. And then she'd go to the supervisors and be like, hey, I'm building a database of therapists who want clinical supervision. If you provide clinical supervising hours, I can put you in my database and I can connect you with people based on like who applies. She literally delivered it manually. And this was before they ever built software. And she got actually pretty big before she ever like got funding, if I'm not mistaken. Like I feel like, I don't even think that they had a seed or a pre-seed. I think it was just like, if I recall correctly, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure Rachel literally just was like, I'm just gonna see how big I can make this thing until I need to go and like, get real money. And when she did go out and get funding, I don't think she went super big VC. I'm pretty sure she went more like, I don't think it was indie funding either. I can't remember the type of VC that she got, but she did end up getting some type of funding. And then she eventually did like build a full-blown platform, but she had already had like hundreds of buyers. And so at the time, it's different now, I think, but at the time, every clinical supervision hour that was bought and paid for like through her manual process, Motivo would take like a little bit of a cut. But anyway, I digress. She validated this idea by delivering the service without software. Actually, I mean, technically it was still software, just not like a full platform yet. Like, she didn't really build anything quite yet. She just used landing page, a couple of forms, and just, through the sheer force of her will and networking and talking to people, got it up and going that way, which is pretty cool.
That's a cool story. Yeah.
I love that story for one, because I have never forgotten it, but also two, your SaaS might be something that you can deliver manually first to test it. Right. Not always. I think there are a lot of technical experiences where like you just got to build the thing, but there might be scenarios where you don't have to immediately build the thing. You can deliver it manually first, which I appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. I like that.
So there's certainly the, set up a landing page and like just let it go. So maybe like you've built the MVP already and you're like, I don't know if this is going to work, but let's see. And there are products where that makes sense. So for example, I mentioned Randy Fishkin earlier. He's launched a product actually called Alert Mouse. Mm-hmm. So in the brand tracking world, this is still a problem today. And it's kind of wild that it is, but it is. In the brand tracking world, if you want to track your brand, there are a couple of places that you'd go. The first is Google Alerts. So like if I want to track DemandMaven as a brand, I could go to Google Alerts and I could put in, DemandMaven, and maybe I do some alternate spelling, but that's the first way. But Google Alerts isn't the most reliable, I would say. And also too, it doesn't seem to do a good job with like mentions in rich media. So if someone mentions DemandMaven in a podcast or a YouTube video, it doesn't know that. And there are other types of mediums that it struggles with.
Right.
So the alternative would be like a brand tracking platform that costs $1 bajillion. There are a few out there. There are a handful that I like, but those are also imperfect as well, because sometimes they'll pick up on your own brand, even though you've suppressed your brand. Like sometimes like if I'm tracking DemandMaven, but then if I publish on like the DemandMaven YouTube, the brand tracking app will be like, DemandMaven was mentioned. Yeah. And I'm like, but it was me. And you can suppress yourself, but it actually doesn't always work. It's actually kind of flimsy a little bit. So anyway, so Rand has also recognized that this is a problem. Rand is also a really good marketer, to be fair. So he's like, I got to track my brand. And he's got to track Sparktoro and some of the other things that he's working on, Snack Bar Studios, etc. He built this little product called Alert Mouse. And Alert Mouse is exactly what it sounds like. It's a brand tracking app, and it's a pretty powerful little tool. And what I like about this is, Rand really understands data, and he understands, like, he has a really great mind for not just fact finding, but like sifting through large amounts of information and kind of figuring out, like, okay, here's the thing, or here's the trend, or whatever. And he had been struggling with tracking his own brand. And what I love about this is he's kind of applying a lot of his like data mindset to, how do you sift through piles of data, like of brand mentions, and kind of figure out what are the most critical ones that you as a marketer need to know about, or you as a founder need to know about. So anyway, so what I like about this though is he kind of just built it for himself and then was like, I feel like this is a big enough problem where other people might be interested in this, and there really aren't that many great competitors. So like there are a handful of tools that are very large, like they're very like, but they're pricey. There's not a whole lot of middle ground stuff that's like quality. And so he sees the opportunity to build something, again, middle ground priced, but quality. And what I love about how he's been launching this is, I would say it's a little different for him. He already has a following, but it started out so simply. It was a low risk for him to build it. He needed it anyway. He did it. But then at the same exact time, gave it a landing page and did more of like the beta route, which was, I'm going to launch this out for beta. If you pay for it, cool. But like, I don't really care if you pay for it. I just want to see if it's valuable and if you think that this is useful or not. And what he's eventually going to do is, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, he could change his mind. But at the time, I believe the plan was get enough users, learn from them as much as possible, and then figure out what's worth paying for versus not. It's still worth it for him to host and to invest in, at least from his perspective, because he has several brands that he's working with and tracking, that he's building and investing in on his own. So it's still worth it for him to have Alert Mouse. But eventually, he's going to start to figure out, okay, pricing, and then also to where does it go next? And that's going to take time, but he's not in a rush. He can also afford to not be in a rush, to be fair. Mm-hmm. Not every founder is like this or in the same position. But I guess, like, to put it in a perspective, if he were in a rush, he would just be a lot more aggressive about like, okay, like, let's do research. Let's talk to people. Let's, blah, 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 blah. But what I like about what he's done so far is he's talked enough about the problem. So he's emailed lists. I don't think he's talked as much about it like on LinkedIn. He might have. He talks about it, I think, a little bit like on LinkedIn and various channels. But what I like about how he's been kind of building this is he's basically like soft launching it to his network and, emailing certain folks and kind of being like, hey, like, what do you think about this? So for example, he just emailed a list recently and was like, hey, I'm like putting Alert Mouse like on, totally like open beta. I just want to see if it's useful, great. But if it's not, let's talk about it. So he's taking a bit more of I think it's a more sustainable approach, of course, but it's more of like it's like not quite like building in public, but a little bit more of like quiet launching / he has a network already. He's putting in front of those people. He's going to figure out monetization and pricing later. They actually might already be charging, but he's taking a bit more of like a calm approach.
Yeah, it's very measured.
Yeah, for sure. That's another way to do it. And it's perfectly valid. I would say, I don't know if Rand did as much customer discovery before he built Alert Mouse. He already knew he needed it. But I think that's a pretty common scenario. I think a lot of founders are in that boat where they're like, I need this. I know I need this. I'm going to build it for me and then see if anyone else wants it. And I think that's perfectly valid.
Yeah.
There are a few other things I've heard of. Sometimes it involves putting prototypes in people's hands, actually. But let's say you do already have an MVP. Like, let's say you're committed to a vision for like product. The last way, and this is the way that I think is also really interesting, would be actually getting the prototype in people's hands, but not just letting them have access to it. Like, you don't just like give them an account and be like, okay, if it's useful, great, here you go. This is a really great way actually to get no information at all. Because most people may not tell you to your face that it's not valuable. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like it's really common to be like, oh yeah, I'll get you a login, and if you use it, cool. And if you don't, that's cool. Let me know or whatever. Like, let me know what's wrong with it. But I find most people never actually tell you what's wrong. If you do, though, you've gotten lucky. What I find is maybe a little bit more apt would be, instead of building or committing to one thing, maybe you have the primary idea, but maybe there are like 2 or 3 ways that you could execute it. So like, let's say, for example, Rachel, I mentioned Motivo earlier. Let's say instead of maybe like a marketplace, let's say she was considering maybe some other thing. Like, maybe instead of hooking up therapists with clinical supervisors, maybe, I don't know, maybe she could build like this is not real at all. There's no way this will work. But it's the first thing that came to mind. Maybe she builds like an AI clinical supervisor that could like deliver clinical supervision hours, and like that's the thing. Now that I don't know if that'll work, but like let's say like that's the idea. And so she's like, oh, I don't know if I should do a marketplace or if I should do like maybe there's just like an AI clinical supervisor that is adjusted for every state that therapists can like, I don't know, get work from, whatever, get clinical supervisor hours. Probably not a good idea, but maybe that's one of her ideas. Maybe, who knows? What I love about this this methodology is instead of building out like the full thing, you could just create prototypes and they could be varying degrees of working. I say working, it could not function at all. It could also just be like, here are a couple of screens. It could be something that's like, okay, it's like there are a couple of buttons you can click, but for the most part, it's like not like a fully functional comp or application. But you have a few different prototypes for what it could be. And my favorite application for this would be if you have access to your prospect or your ideal buyer, actually putting each of them in front of them. Now, the assumption here is that you've talked to some people already. This is hard to do like totally cold, but getting their feedback on, okay, which of these best resonates with you? And also like, what's your impression of what this does for you based on what you're seeing? And what do you think about that? Tell me more about, you don't want to ask, do you think that's valuable? Because that's like so leading, but getting their feedback and their perspective on each of those screens is also usually very eye-opening because you kind of get a feel and a sense for they're leaning towards this or, oh, this is, like they seem to be gravitating towards these things or what have you. And I love the idea of, they call them design sprints at Google, but you're basically doing like a design sprint on like, but you're prototyping ideas and getting feedback on them very quickly before you actually commit to like fully building them out or what have you. Prototyping is a lot of fun. I love prototyping. I actually worked with Rand on a couple of prototypes for SparkToro, and it's just, I don't know. I think it's really cool. I think it's like before you even scope out the requirements and build the PRD and like you could also just throw up some prototypes. Basecamp actually has a book called Shape Up. That's a really good read. And they talk a lot about prototyping their ideas. Shape Up isn't going to work for every SaaS. There are some SaaS companies that I like, they're like the way that they're structured, like they're kind of, I hate to say like traditional product management model, but like traditional product management, I should say, is a bit more appealing, I think, in certain scenarios. Shape Up, I think, works best really for bootstrappers who have maybe more fleshed out teams, who are very early and want to learn how to do design sprints, but not like in the super stodgy Google way. Because design sprints and design like sprint thinking comes from, it originated from Google, if I'm not mistaken. But it has kind of evolved as it's trickled out into the SaaS world, but also like the consulting space has like, there are consultants out there who use like design sprint methodology and things like that. And it's so funny too, because when I was on the board of Moz and I was with Tara Reid, we actually talked about how design sprints and sprint thinking it's not like a newfound thing. It's actually quite old because design sprint thinking came from like another thing. But it was just really interesting because the idea of mocking something up, prototyping it, and putting it in front of someone within a week is like mind blowing to a lot of teams. They're like, I can't even get a PRD approved in a week. Like, right. Let alone having a pod or a team of people like build something, prototype it, and then like put it in front of a human. Like that is bonkers. But that is the whole premise of design sprints. So that's a huge core element of Shape Up and also design sprints. And it's one of my absolute favorite ways to get feedback on ideas very, very fast without committing to building out the whole thing. You really just need you don't even need like a good comp, although I would push for having like as high of a fidelity of a comp as you possibly can. It doesn't have to be working though. It just needs to be like, this is the screen that someone would see, or these are the screens. It could be several screens. Maybe it's not like clickable, but it's like, although with Figma, you can kind of make anything these days and, Cloud Code. But all that to say, you can make something that is like, this is what it would be. What do you think? And here's another version of that same idea or a different idea completely. And I love that level of engagement because you run the risk of like, if you do build the thing and you just give someone a login, you may never hear from that person ever again about like their thoughts. And it's just such a big risk to me if you have a relatively captive audience, to let them be like, go willy-nilly, like in a playground that you have no control over or oversight into, and you may never ever get them on the phone ever again. I'd rather hear from them, but this is confusing as hell, or like, what is it supposed to do? Or I'd rather kind of hear that live and asking them the questions. What do you think this does? And like, tell me more about what your thoughts are on this. What are your very first reactions as you see this? And how do you think this would be used? And then tell me why it works and tell me why it doesn't work. I want to hear like the argument for and then the counter argument against. And actually do that thinking exercise with people, because they may shock you and totally open your eyes up to something completely different that you didn't anticipate. But at the same time, they may validate a lot of what you thought. And then similarly, they may not. And you'll get a good feel for like, I got to pivot away from this, or actually, no, I was right. Like this was a good thing, but maybe I got to tweak like these things, or maybe, whatever. So anyway, that's my primer on idea validation. I will say, to kind of close out and wrap it up, you're never going to feel like it's perfect and like you're 100% ready. I think and this is, just from all of my speaking over the past few years, but I've spoken at various accelerators and incubators where the founder never feels ready to build, or they never feel ready to commit to an audience. There are some founders who spend years interviewing and doing no building. And I will say, you're never going to feel like it's perfect. But what I'd rather you do is I'd rather you feel like you're 60 to 70% confident based off of real data than be 100% confident based off of no data and you're 50K out or 100K out.
Right.
That is a much worse position to me. Even if that 100% confidence isn't warranted yet, because it's based off of no data, you're just confident. It's like blind optimism. So that I would rather you not take that approach. I'd rather you take the, I'm 60% confident, but it's based off of real data and maybe even possibly some prototypes before I've ever actually spent the money or spent the energy or whatever to build the thing. And then of course, if your idea is small enough that it's no real big issue if you just build it and do it, you take the RAND approach, you build the alert mouse and you call it a day, or maybe you take the maybe you do the I'm going to put this on GitHub, throw it up there and just call it a day. Like if that's you, do that. You're not building like a giant, huge B2B platform. Like you're good. You can just do whatever you want kind of and see where it goes. But yeah, I those are all the different routes to take and kind of how to think about how to validate getting real information and real data from people and not just depending on ads, which I've already kind of mentioned is such a crapshoot in my opinion. And I think it's just such a waste of time. It's way too competitive and just too expensive, to be honest.
Right. Yeah. And then I guess just to add to what you were saying, I like the 60 to 70% because you also don't need to get to 100% with data.
Nope.
Get to 60 to 70.
Exactly. And I would say like if you're a technical founder, that's going to feel so uncomfortable because a lot of technical founders in particular want to operate with 100% or 90%. And the reality is there's never ever going to be a time ever in your entire journey of being a founder where that's going to be true. So get used to 70 to 80%. That's the norm. And otherwise, you end up spending so much energy on fact finding that that's not going to pay off. Like the delta is not going to be worth it. Like you're going to waste more time and energy and sometimes you won't execute anything at all, which is even worse in my opinion. A great CEO is able to operate with 70% of the information and make decisions without perfect information. But what's important is that they make the decision and that they take an action, even if it's no action, but it's intentional. So that's my perspective, at least. Cool. All right. We did it. Product idea validation. There are other ways. For sure. Those are my favorites. And maybe there'll be a part 2 if, just depending on how people react to this one.
Yeah. Great.
We have some past episodes on product market fit that we'll try to cross link in this one that I think would also be worth listening to because you can also validate your product market fit. In the meantime, thanks again for listening. And thanks again, Kim, for joining me.
Yeah. Thanks, Asia.